Welcome, President Akande.
Hello, how you
I
guys doing? Thank you for
good.
having me this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we haven't met yet.
Yes.
I've had a couple of near misses where I've been on Champlain prior to the pandemic, where I was doing things on Champlain campus. But good to meet you.
Thank you for
Good
having me.
good to see you, Richard.
You too, Senator. How are you?
Good. And Susan, nice to have you with us. And Sophia.
Hi.
So looks like we're streaming now. So Senate Education, September 15th. Just 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks left until adjournment, finally, of the 2020 session. So I just wanted to begin by clarifying where we are today in the process, what we're doing and what we're not doing. So at our last meeting, we semi-finalized some language for actual inclusion in the budget. And we didn't vote that out, but we sent it over with our unanimous opinion to Appropriations. I sat in with them and talked about it. They accepted everything we did. So they're moving forward with that draft, the full 53 million for K through 12, the expanded 7 million for HVAC, and then all of the policy pieces. There was sort of a surprise in that Senator Ash mentioned the after-school task force, because as all of you probably know, the Tax and Regulate Conference Committee is coming to a close. And one of the things that the House insisted upon was dedicated money for after school from Tax and Regulate. So it looks as though that will be part of the deal. Ideally, the House would have passed our after school task force in March when we got it over to them, or I think even earlier. They didn't. So Senator Ash suggested that it go into the budget along with our other stuff. And I assented to that. The House has now said that they're okay with that. So that will go in right after the pieces that we approved. Today, what we're doing is looking to draft a letter from Senate Ed to Appropriations about a number of different things. We're going to be starting with the House's recommendation of $10 million for the independent colleges. We'll also go to a piece of language that Senator Ingram and I developed for UVM's piece in the budget. Obviously, the committee hasn't seen that yet, nor has UVM. So it's important to get everybody's opinion on that. And then, what is the other piece that I'm forgetting?
Outright,
What's that, Debbie?
outright Vermont.
Oh, Outright Vermont and the bridge funding, that's
Bridge
right.
funding.
Those have both already been dropped into the budget. The Appropriations Committee did their own testimony on those topics, and they're already clear on those. Let's, if we can, start with Susan Steitley. And Susan, I'll ask you to maybe introduce the topic and then go to your witnesses as you prefer. But I will say that in speaking with the Appropriations Committee, and I'm going to read this because I don't think anybody has it handy, but in the House passed budget, there was the sum of $10 million to be distributed among independent colleges. And this is the wording that goes with it. It says, to the Agency of Administration, $10 million for equitable distribution. And I flag that on behalf of Appropriations. They're wanting to drill down into equitable. And that would be determined in consultation with AVIC among the 11 independent colleges. In order to qualify for funding from this appropriation, colleges must be a Vermont state chartered school. The funds are for the costs associated with technology for remote instruction, PPE, cleaning, and room and board refunds when students were sent home due to COVID-19. So there were two concerns from the Appropriations Committee that they asked us to ask you. One was, here it allows the Agency of Administration working with AVIC to develop a quote unquote equitable distribution. So one question that they had was, wasn't there a formula that was used for, I believe, the 1.5 million that went out in a previous budget? And could we use that formula rather than developing a new one? And then the second thing is, Senator Ash in particular was wondering about the $10 million round number. He wanted to drill down into that and find out exactly how precise a determination that was, or was it a ballpark? So Susan, with those questions and concerns in mind, feel free to order the testimony of yourself and your witnesses as you will.
Thank you, Chairman Baruth, and thank you for inviting me. And I am pleased to have President Sophie Hallett here and President Benjamin Akanda here as well. We really appreciate all you have been doing. I know you've been working 24/7, and it's been amazing work that you're doing. And also just want to mention that we do appreciate the past support that you gave us, in particular the work that Senator Hardy did in June for possible funding for testing relief. I think maybe it's best if I address right away, Senator Baruth, the language that you brought up since you mentioned it. Jeannie, do you have what I sent you so that the committee members can see it, the memo that I sent for today?
Yes, it's posted on our website.
Can you access it, or do you want to have it brought up on the screen so that you can all see it?
I'll let Senator Baruth respond to that.
Jeannie, I don't find it under today's documents. I don't see anything.
It
there.
is.
Is it?
You maybe you should refresh. Yeah, because I just pulled it up.
Okay, one second. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay.
And so this would be the AVIC request?
Yes, this is the AVIC request. It is revised from what we gave the House, in that we've changed the language that the House proposed. And maybe we want to just go directly to the second page, where you will find what we're proposing to address some of the concerns that you mentioned, Senator Baruth.
Yeah.
So on page 2, section 3, it now says to the Agency of Administration, $10 million for equitable distribution to be determined in consultation with AVIC and among the 11 colleges. First, the 10 million was what JFO suggested. They said there would be no more money than 10 million for us. We would love to have asked for more, but that was all that was available. And we have had over $144 million of losses, which you can see further down on the sheet. So one safeguard is that this discussion will be with AOA as far as the equitable distribution, but we have added language that to let you know what we would like to consider, the factors that we would consider, including but not limited to the CARES Act funding guidelines, which is what you referenced, Senator Baruth. But that gives out funding based on only on FTE and benefits the largest institutions with the most students. And we don't think that is equitable. So we would like to add some other parameters around that, creating a floor to protect the smaller schools and also to consider endowment size. And there may be other factors as we get into the discussion of it with AOA and the independent colleges that we maybe want to add to make sure that it is an equitable distribution. So in addition to that, we added language that the institutions must be accredited. Before that was not in there, although it said chartered.
Mhm.
And rather than having the previous categories that you mentioned, the PPE cost, the remote instruction costs, we're asking that the funds for the COVID-related 19 losses and expenditures meet the federal guidelines for funding eligibility. You know, all the colleges are so different. So we have colleges that have no PPE PPE costs. We have some that have no remote learning costs. And they really vary on what it is they would need reimbursed for. So putting in that language that it has to be with the eligibility of federal guidelines makes it broad enough that everybody can get reimbursed for what they may need, not categories. It may, for example, some of the schools, the smaller schools in particular that didn't bring any students back, don't have testing costs, don't have cleaning costs, don't have PPE costs. So this would allow for everyone to get more of an equitable distribution based on their losses and expenditures.
Okay, so, all right, why don't we hear from the two presidents that you've brought with you today in any particular order?
Oh, Sophie Hallett, why don't you go first?
My apologies, I was muted there. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Susan. And thank you to this committee. And thank you, Chair Baruch, as well. Greetings from Southern Vermont. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all at this extremely challenging time for the School for International Training, or SIT, and for all of Vermont's independent colleges due to COVID-19. I also want to thank this committee for considering the House of Representatives' recommendation of relief funding for our independent colleges. These are extraordinary times. Thank you for considering extraordinary measures. I am Dr. Sophia Howlett, President of SIT in Brattleboro. SIT was founded in 1964 and is an accredited higher education institution. SIT is an active member of AVIC. According to Vermont's Department of Labor, we are the largest vocational and training school in the state. We're the largest institution of higher education in Windham County and the 6th largest employer according to Think Vermont. We believe in the power of diversity, the importance of an intercultural perspective, and fostering openness and understanding. Through our graduate institute based in Vermont, our semester-long study abroad programs across the world, and our certificate programs for professionals, SIT prepares students to be effective leaders, professionals, and citizens. Unlike some of our fellow AVIC members, SIT is a non-traditional higher education institution. Most of our students do not physically reside on our campus, and our activities extend from high schoolers all the way through our students' professional careers. However, like all our fellow members, we rely heavily on tuition-based revenue to transform the lives of young Vermonters. Our alumni are community leaders helping each day to make Vermont a better place for all of us. They include Rick Berkfield, the co-founder and executive director of Food Connects, H.B. Lozito, Executive Director of Out in the Open, which connects and empowers rural LGBTQ people in Vermont, and Stephen Gillen, President and co-founder of the Windham County chapter of the NAACP and a member of the Governor's Racial Equity Task Force. As a trailblazing and quintessentially Vermont organization dedicated to promoting international education, our business model is in the bullseye of COVID-19. As the pandemic began to spread, we found ourselves racing to bring home more than 900 students from 36 countries at an added cost to the organization of over $650,000. SIT is no stranger to world wars, civil wars, and natural disasters, but COVID-19 has been a truly unprecedented challenge. Financially, we worked quickly in March to respond to that challenge, stewarding our money effectively to prepare for a difficult fall, including participating in the Federal Payroll Protection Program. But now, here we are in September. And as we are all very aware, good stewardship and an effective business model has limits in our present context. In fiscal year 2019, our tuition-based revenue was $48.4 million. This fiscal year, our expected tuition-based revenue is $3.5 million, a 93% drop in revenue due solely to COVID-19, as we are unable to send young Americans on our transformational programs. SIT's revenue losses have been the highest among AVIC members, accounting for roughly a third of the total lost revenue. Our consequent restructuring efforts have directly affected 52 of our Vermont staff, and we now have 130 employees based in Vermont supporting our mission and programs. Despite this, SIT remains a significant employer and economic driver in Southern Vermont. Indeed, our independent colleges together employ over 9,000 people. Our combined AVIC revenue losses amount to over $144 million, and SIT alone is in need of $5.6 million in relief as this crisis extends towards winter and spring. None of us have been eligible for relief from the state before, despite this serious need. As you know, the House has recommended $10 million in coronavirus relief funding for the independent colleges. Clearly, $10 million divided among AVIC's 11 members will not solve all our problems, but it will certainly be critical, especially combined with the ongoing individual efforts to restructure and cut costs. We all recognize this is a time of extraordinary disruption and transition. It's vital for our survival to adapt. SIT is doing just that, and at the same time, we are guided by our good neighbor policy. We have reached out to Windham County at a time of economic devastation to bring our talents and experience home. We have set up virtual internships and are partnering with the Community College of Vermont and others to support workforce development. We have partnered with state and local officials to provide dormitory space for exposed first responders and frontline health workers, and offered backup to the Department of Children and Families for daycare and after-school services. Even as we struggle with serious revenue losses and remain very concerned about the prospect of further layoffs, we continue to look for ways to help our community, even as we look to you all for a helping hand. Thank you again for the opportunity to share with your committee a snapshot of how COVID-19 is affecting our SIT. And thank you for considering urgently needed relief of $10 million for Vermont's independent colleges. I strongly believe, and I hope you do as well, that we are vital to the economic health and success of our state now and in the future. Thank you, and I'm ready to answer any questions. And you will also find an attached financial statement of our losses to date. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We could probably hold questions until we've heard from President Akanda. Let's do that. President Akanda, I have to say you have the most impressive Zoom background of anybody that I've seen in the last 6 months.
Well, I want to thank you for that. My kids have been really good to me. They keep giving me all this really nice background, and so I'm using them. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I want to thank you for inviting me this afternoon and for your leadership and hard work in supporting Vermonters during this remarkable time in our history. What we have found is that the COVID pandemic is an equal opportunity pandemic that has impacted every single one of us, but more so, it's impacted higher education more than ever. I'm Benjamin Ola Akande, president of Champlain College. I began my tenure on July 1, but I've been engaged with Champlain since my announcement on April 20th. And I've been fully engaged in leading our return to campus fall preparation and execution. all over the news, we've seen that universities and colleges have become hotbeds for virus transmission. That is not the case for Champlain or any one of my counterparts as part of our organization. Our success has many benefits: more satisfactory education for students and parents, minimizing the adverse economic effects of isolation and quarantine, decreasing the adverse psychological effect of isolation, and showing the rest of the country and perhaps the world that this can be done, but it comes with an investment cost. Our COVID mitigation plans have been extensive and comprehensive. They include aggressive testing protocols, modifications to our facilities, cleaning, disinfecting, and much more. We reduced the number of students brought back to campus by more than 30% this fall to de-densify our residence halls and also to reserve space for quarantine and isolation. I am pleased to share with you that our plan is working. And as of today, we have conducted more than 4,000 tests with only one positive case, giving us a positivity rate of 0.02%, well below that of Vermont, let alone the rest of the nation. We have made the necessary investments to enable our students to return to campus safely and to protect the health and safety of our community. But they have come at a great cost, and the private colleges have been affected just like our public college colleagues when it comes to pandemic-related costs. Champlain has incurred an estimated $12 million in pandemic-related losses. This includes our investments in testing of more than $2 million, $2.5 million in losses from room and board. That there was the refund from last spring, and another loss from the shift to remote instruction, cost from PPP supplies, cleaning, and much more. Champlain College and its peers in the higher education sector play an important role in our state's economy. You know that. And we contribute to the economic vibrancy of this community. We are all employers and importers of talent. We educate Vermonters and recruit students to Vermont from around the country and perhaps around the world. And many of our graduates join Vermont's workforce and contribute further to our economy, a way of paying it forward. So we appreciate the work of the committee, and we appreciate what you did in June to try to ensure potential funding for the private college regarding testing. Today, we ask again for your support and strongly urge you to retain the $10 million allocation for independent colleges for COVID-related funding within the fiscal year 21 restarted state budget. We believe that the strong private and public higher education sector means a strong Vermont for us all. And we believe that at the end of the day, our response to COVID epidemic has been so successful that essentially it has become a competitive advantage for this state. And that we can all say without hesitation that coming to Vermont to go to college is the safest thing that you can do in America today. That is a success factor. I thank you.
Great point. And I know that I think President Howlett mentioned, or Susan Steitley mentioned Senator Hardy's urging on the testing. That was part of the idea behind that, is to make sure that our higher education system writ large was ready for the wave of students coming back. Questions for either of those two presidents or for Susan Steitley? Senator Hardy.
Thank you. And absolutely what my concern was in June was to make sure that we had the resources for your institutions to be able to test students and staff and faculty as colleges reopened. And I am incredibly grateful that the institutions took that path and have a very rigorous testing protocol, and that was certainly my intention in recommending funding in June. However, I'm not so keen on the expanded request now and the direction it's taken. I do have a question specifically for Sophia, or Sophia, I'm sorry. It was unclear to me how many students you have on campus at this time, or if you're running any of your programs at all. I was not clear in your testimony.
So thank you for that, Senator Hardy. We have no students on campus right now. The students that we normally bring on campus are either our graduate students during large parts of the year, or also we have a lot of youth programs and exchange programs. So obviously we went the very safe route of moving our graduate students who were already in a kind of hybrid low res program. We moved that completely online. And then our exchange and youth programs simply haven't been able to happen because those are students coming from other countries. And then in terms of other students, we do actually, and I consider this a major success, we do actually have 28 students right now in Iceland and Rwanda. But that's all we've been able to do out of a normal year of, normally this semester we'd have about 850 to 900 students overseas with us.
Okay.
So this is the scale of our problem, yes.
So you're 40, it's about 40, I'm looking at your financial sheet that you presented with your testimony, about $44 million in revenue loss is due to your tuition loss for these programs that you're not being able to run.
Exactly, we
For you,
simply, sorry.
So for you at your institution, it's mostly a revenue problem, not an expense problem.
It's not just, it's actually both. Because in terms of, we still, just because we don't have programs running, we obviously want to maintain our staff and our faculty because we're aiming to have programs back very soon. And so we have really kind of reoriented ourselves to try and maintain our staff. And as I mentioned, we still have 130 staff members around our campus here in Brattleboro. Who are working for us despite the fact that we don't have students overseas. So we have expenses and we have revenue losses.
Right, but the impact, the direct impact based on this financial sheet you provided, the vast majority of the impact is revenue loss, not expense related.
Yes.
And President Akande, you said you had a 30% reduction in the number of students on campus. So about 70% of your normal student population is actually present in Vermont. Is that correct? Did I?
Yes, currently we have about, let me give you the exact number there that are on our campus as of today. We're looking at 850 students in our Champlain campus housing right now.
And how many you normally have?
We probably have double that. And what has happened is that as a result of our de-densification process, going from 2 in a room to 1 in a room to 4 in a quad to 1 in the quad, we've been very cautious about that, and that has essentially cost that's been a significant loss to us over time. So our impact has been both from the expense side and also from the revenue side. If you want me to give you a breakdown, I'll be more than happy to do so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the breakdowns. I love the financial sheets, but I was just trying to get a sense of how many students you had back. And you said you had a 30% reduction in your student population, but now you just said 50%. So
no, what we're talking about, you said on campus, because we also have students that are off campus. Students that did not come back, that they came back, but they're not staying with us. They have found accommodation elsewhere. So that I was just trying to give you an ideal, the exact numbers of what we're looking at.
Okay, so about 50% of your normal population is on campus. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So I mean, I've heard comparisons for the private colleges to both other institutions of higher education and also other businesses. And we have obviously provided a pretty good amount of revenue for our public institutions, UVM, and I look forward to hearing from Mr. Kate about what they're doing, and also the state colleges. To this point, we haven't yet provided anything to the private colleges. But and when we look at you as businesses, at the businesses in the state that we have provided grants to, the highest the amount of grant we've provided is only $100,000 for our businesses in the state. And so if you're trying to make the argument that your businesses, this would be a far greater amount of money for you than for our regular businesses in the state. We also have only covered their revenue losses, not their expenses in most cases, except for with a few exceptions. So I'm much more sympathetic to Ms. Howlett talking about their revenue losses than the expenses of bringing students back to campus. And while I laud the private colleges and the colleges for their ability to bring students back with very few cases, the fact is that they decided to bring students back and they incurred those costs because of that decision, when they could have made the decision to bring fewer students back to campus and therefore incur fewer costs. So I'm much more sympathetic to providing aid for revenue loss rather than expenses based on a risky decision to bring students back. I also, and Susan mentioned this, there are at least 2 independent colleges that have significant endowments. And I am not keen on providing state funding for businesses, private businesses with huge financial resources. Most of the largest businesses in our state did not get state funding. They did get some federal funding, but this funding I would much prefer, when we define what equitable is going toward the institutions that have less financial security and smaller endowments to rest on. It's just not an equitable thing to give state funding to an institution with a $1.1 billion endowment. And I will say that as I represent them. There are others that have large endowments too. So I would prefer that we really scale this down and really define it a lot better, what equitable is and what we're actually covering. Because a lot of these expenses were, as I said, because of choices made for the number of students they brought back, not required expenses.
Can I chime in briefly?
Absolutely.
Senator Hardy, thank you. I appreciate your concern and your assessment. Let me suggest to you that when it comes to endowments, I think people tend to misunderstand that endowments are essentially available to be consumed and utilized for anything that when those needs come up. And for an individual that I've had the honor to serve as president of two institutions, I can say to you, ma'am, that one of the things that gets colleges in trouble is when they use their endowments for things that it was not meant for. The very essence of endowments is very restricted funding. In many instances, scholarships for funded professorships. And so when you start dipping into endowments that are not meant for things for which they were obligated, you put your institution in legal limbo. And so I'm not defending anybody. I'm just saying to you that I think it's important that you understand that dynamic and the strictness that comes with those, the purposes and intent of endowment. Second, on the issue of expenses versus revenue, I think throughout the process of this summer and engaging with the governor, engaging with Dr. Levine, and really working with our government entities, the decisions that we made in returning to the fall were not isolated decisions. They were decisions that were made in consultation with our state counterparts, the leadership, the government, who encouraged that we do what we can, but we do it within the reason of strong medical and health awareness in returning to the fall. And so we felt an obligation. And the obligation is that indeed, if we're going to return in the fall, that we do so responsibly. And we do so without putting our students in harm's way. Now, ma'am, if you were in a situation that now, a couple of weeks into the semester, the cases of COVID has just been astronomical and spread, I would say that we haven't done a good job at that. But I think to an extent, ma'am, we've been very successful to the point where we've become the ultimate benchmark in this country for how to mitigate viruses and pandemic. And the expenses that we've incurred have been expenses because we follow directives, we've followed the regulations, we played by the rules of the game. We've done everything that we can to make sure that first and foremost, it is about the welfare and the safety of our students, faculty, and staff, and by extension, our community. And then what we're saying is that give us the same level of respect and support that you will give to our public counterparts. We're all in this together. We're trying to educate the next generation of Americans and Vermonters. And so when you look at our cost, for instance, the revenue loss that we've had for my institution, for fiscal year 2021, lost revenue is $6.7 million. For fiscal year 2021, estimated expenses, we're talking about $2 million. And that expense, a significant portion of that is supplies of PPEs, COVID testing, apps for social, to be able to for social tracing, and things that are necessary to keep our communities safe. I end with this. There's a cost associated with responsibility.
So
And we were willing to take that cost, and we do it because it's not just about us. It's also about the community that we represent. And for someone that came from Missouri, that has seen the level of less attention to details as I've seen in Vermont, I am so proud to be a member of this community. I'm so proud to be a member of this state for what you guys represent. You guys are the new benchmark. We are now the new benchmark because I'm now a member of it, about how good things are done. And I would say that you send a very clear message, not just to Vermonters, but to the nation, that you care about higher education, and that the consequences of this will be more students coming to us in the future because they know that we care and they know that we're taking care of our own. I thank you.
Senator Hardy, you wanted to respond?
Yes, thank you, Senator Baruth. President Akande, I completely agree with you that your colleges did a good job of an excellent job of making sure that students were brought back safely, and that the consequences of an irresponsible protocols were not, at least yet, the semester has just begun, have not spilled into the communities. And I am grateful that you and others were responsible. However, you made the choice to bring students back in person and therefore to incur those costs. The alternative would have been to bring fewer students back and therefore incur fewer costs. So that was the choice that I was discussing. I would never suggest that you should make the choice between bringing students back irresponsibly and bringing students back responsibly. But you incurred a cost because you brought students back, when the alternative would be more remote students. And to your point about endowments, I know this is their first time before the committee and you don't know me, but I have worked directly with college endowments and I know exactly how they function. I also know that colleges have more many, not all, colleges have more flexibility with their endowments than they will let on in.
So thank you. Susan, I will go to you. I would like to try to move on to our UVM piece and Richard Cape, but feel free to respond.
I can appreciate Senator Hardy's concerns, and I agree with, of course, President Akande. I did just want to give a few more details about the endowments. There's only one institution, Middlebury College, that has a higher endowment than UVM. And two of our institutions have a less of an endowment than CCV has. So most of our institutions do not have high, enormous endowments to rely on. And to address that matter particularly, we put in the new proposed language that endowment size would be considered, because we definitely want to consider that, and the institutions that have endowments want to consider that as well. So we hope to address that issue with that new language that I hope that you will consider.
So we are of at least two minds about this, because I favor the House recommendation for reasons that I'll lay out later when the committee has our discussion. But what I'd like to do is hear from Richard Kate, take a look at the language that was drafted around financial transparency, and then try to reserve time for the committee to discuss among itself what we'd like to do. We have three options on the independent college funding. One is to support the House recommend, one is to try to change the House recommend, and the other is to not address it at all. And we'll see where we land. But welcome, Richard Kate. And Richard, I'm wondering if you had a chance to look at what is posted on our website. There's a document there that includes the paragraph about financial transparency. Have you?
All right, I actually was not aware that it was something I should have looked at.
Oh, okay. Under Debbie Ingram's name, you'll see it says memo. And if you click on that, it addresses a couple of different issues. But this set of paragraphs came out of testimony that we had earlier in the session. Responses from faculty and staff around the ways in which UVM was going about dealing with the pandemic financial follow-on. And there, I would say you could sum their concerns up under two headings. One I would call progressivity. And I think the university has done work on the progressive nature of their response to the cuts. The other was transparency. And so what you see here does not address their complaints about progressivity, because some of the actions the university has taken fall under that heading. But you'll see that there's language suggested, and I'll just read it. Therefore, Senate Education requests that the following language be included in the appropriations bill has a particular obligation to make it transparent. That obligated as the state's efforts to stem UVM's financial losses to the COVID-19 emergency have expanded. For the duration of the governor's order, appropriations and education committees, as well as the UVM community, timely accounting of all funds appropriated, I'm covered by the governor's emergency orders, and the revenue loss projections upon which the university's present and future budget cuts are premised as actual data becomes available. And that's speaking to two related concerns that people working on the UVM campus felt that they weren't privy to financials, but also weren't privy to what the projections were that were driving the cuts, and how those projections would eventually jibe with financial reality. So I realize that was your first look at that. It is also some of the committee members' first look. So would you prefer to speak to that language, Mr. Kate, or would you rather speak generally to the university's response to COVID first?
Well, I can go to the language. Obviously, all of our records are public record and thus are,
Yep.
I think, as I try to think about what people were or are looking for that we haven't had. You know, the president, the provost, have spoken to innumerable groups on campus in regard to, as recently as just yesterday, I was describing in detail the information that appears on the sheet that I provided today and had provided earlier in September, that details where we've spent the money we've gotten thus far and what's been allocated. Because a faculty member yesterday was asking me if the headline they had read somewhere was true, that the university had already received $80 million in COVID relief funding. And I had to disavow of that. And then I went through very carefully the 8.7 we got for FY20, the 19 million we've received thus far, and the fact that the legislature was currently considering 10. So we're always happy to do that. The bottom line, of course, is every day the numbers are changing as we go forward. So I don't really see any problem providing that. The only question would be the vehicle by which that occurs, and the timing. You know, is this, for instance, a monthly report that the university would produce? The expectation, because obviously we and then we move forward to the next month and that sort of thing. So, or you know, is on a quarterly basis. I think it would be good to stipulate what it is we're required to do in that regard. Otherwise, people will think, well, that means every day you're going to give me your latest numbers type thing. And that
what about if it said a full specific quarterly accounting?
I think that'd be perfect.
Okay. So with that, are there other areas you'd like to hit in your testimony, Mr. Kate?
I think, you know, with our numbers that we provided in the past, the revenue, I've heard a discussion here about the break between revenue loss and then expenses. Obviously, we're restricted to some degree by the CARES Act requirements in terms of what you can spend CARES Act money on. So we're trying to be very careful with that. But you know, right now we're projecting a revenue loss just in net tuition over $20 million. We're probably down $7 million for the year on room and board. So we're in that ballpark. And then meanwhile, I won't describe, but we've detailed all the costs we've incurred in terms of refunds, technology enhancements for classrooms for online education, testing. We do have a very rigorous testing program. Of course, we're testing students weekly. We tested them before they arrived. Our incidence rate thus far for net positive is 0.06%, so it's very, very low. We have taken over 250 students can be isolated depending on the need. We haven't needed anybody, but we took one entirely offline for that purpose, and we have other backup. So, you know, we've been doing all the things you've heard about from the presidents, and I don't need to keep you long. It's just we were asked what would it take to help further fill the gap, and we did some calculations. It came up with the $11 million for the House. The House, as you said, put forward the 10.
Can I ask, Mr. Kate, so this speaks back to Senator Hardy's point about the decision to bring students back. Can you just give us a sense from UVM's perspective, what were the trade-offs you considered when I'm sure you considered at some point a fully remote semester or year, what were the trade-offs when you made that decision?
We considered the matter very deeply, very extensively, and very thoroughly. I think in the first instance, obviously, we thought long and hard about the health and wellness of the community, the state, and the students, all of our faculty and staff. What would be the best thing in that regard? On the other side was the whole matter of we are a higher education institution, and most of our students in survey data wanted to come back, and their parents wanted them to come back. And so we wanted to try to address that desire, and then, you know, that then turns into the whole matter of becoming a revenue issue very quickly, because if UVM starts to look just like, you know, I'm not trying to point at anybody, but other institutions that are out there that are online only all the time, then students, especially out-of-state students, will be taking a very hard look at us in terms of the tuition they pay. Because if they do not have the UVM experience on campus, it's very unlikely that a fair number of them just probably would not come, and we might lose them. So we wanted to benefit the students, but we also wanted to ensure the viability of the institution. We've always said that we were going to pursue this based on the best recommendations of our health professionals. We just this morning had a conversation with President Provost and I and others with two of our epidemiologist experts from UVM Medical Center, and who are on the faculty of the university. And this is a type of analysis we go through all the time. So it was a very deliberate action based on very deliberate analysis of the options. But yet we were prepared to pull back if we thought that the health and safety of the people and students, faculty, staff, community were at risk.
Thank you. Questions for Richard Kate about UVM? Okay. Senator Hardy.
I just want to put back a little bit on your contention that, you know, one of the decision-making things was that students and parents wanted to come back to campus. There are thousands of students around Vermont right now that would like to be in school full-time, who would like to be able to go to kindergarten full-time, who would like to be able to go to high school full-time, and they're not able to because we are in a pandemic. And so I guess I would just push back on the entire higher education in our country and this idea that we needed to have students back in person rather than remote education. I do laud the Vermont institutions for doing it better than anybody else in the country, but there was the option, and there still is the option, of remote higher education during a pandemic. And I find it incredibly frustrating to hear leaders of higher education institutions saying, well, that's what our students wanted, so we had to do it. That's what our K-12 students want too, and our K-12 parents want to, and we don't have that option. And so it's a huge inequity in our very own state. So Mr. Kate, I would push back on that strongly. You did other options. And if you can't make the UVM experience an excellent one, regardless of the circumstances, then I think that's a shame.
I don't think I said that we had to do it because they wanted to. Senator Brooke asked me what were the things we considered. That was one of the things we considered. I think we do have an excellent online experience, but the people that are coming to the university, many of them want it. But I understand it.
Okay. All right, so Susan, was that a
I just
request
wanted-
to speak?
Yes, I just also want to mention that President Akande has to leave in 3 minutes in case anybody has a question for him.
I don't think we have any more questions. I will thank you for coming. I think we have a much clearer idea of the scale of the need and also the reasoning behind a lot of what you've been doing. So I appreciate it very much. Please feel free to stay with us for committee discussion if you'd like. Also feel free to drop off because it is boring for people who aren't part of our small group. So thank you very much if you do drop off. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead knowing that you're listening. Susan.
So yeah, I would just like to say a few words in closing. That I hope you'll look closely at how we redrafted the language for this appropriation, because I feel that it's important that, you know, that is included because it considers and outlines a sense of the equitable distribution. And also the fact that it is allowing the institutions to go where they need it the most and not be confined by a category where they may not have any expenses. So I think we really need to broaden the language or we're going to be doing a disservice if you agree to the appropriation to these smaller and all the colleges.
Yeah. Speaking only for myself, I like that language better than what was in the House version because it does some of the work rather than just leaving it to the agency of administration. So committee, we have about a half an hour and I want to just clarify where we are. So again, Outright Vermont, which was going to be part of our letter, and the bridge funding for the state colleges, the Appropriations Committee considers themselves already decided to include those. So I think having our support in this letter for those is fine, but it is redundant in a way. So what we're really talking about is the language around UVM, which I was pleased to see Richard Kate supported with that one friendly amendment. So let's start there quickly. Is there anybody who didn't like that language around UVM transparency? Okay. Anybody have a problem with making it quarterly, that report? That would go up on our website, House website, appropriations, etc. Okay, so we'll do that. Now to the question of the independent colleges and the House recommend of 10 million. So I will open it to whoever would like to speak to it. I'll reserve my own comments for a minute, but anybody want to speak to that question? Yeah, Andrew.
I have a question first about, I don't know if I've seen the House language you talk about, or have I seen it? And I just
It's in the House passed budget. I read it, but I can read it again.
it's just the short.
It's pretty short. So it's on page 96 of their House passed budget, but I'll read it. To the Agency of Administration, $10 million for equitable distribution. That's the phrase that Appropriations was wondering about. Determined in consultation with AVIC among the 11 independent colleges. Now, Susan pointed out they have a new formulation for that. And maybe it's better for us just to look at Susan Steitley's language. Do you have that in front of you, Andy?
Yes.
Because I really don't like the House language for a couple of reasons, but we have a couple of questions. One is the number, and the other is, how it's distributed, if it's distributed. So the House put in 10 million, which we heard testimony was, I would put it that it is a round number, but rounded down from a much higher need. So as with the 32 million for K-12 that the House put forward, they did it according to what they could afford. And so 10 million was the most the House felt they could afford of the ask. So let's just talk about that number for a minute. Where do people fall? I said that I support it, and I'll just rough out my reasons. So I feel that this federal funding, we're being asked to act as a pass-through, but not a duty-free pass-through. We're supposed to be making intelligent, reasoned decisions about where it goes to reduce the loss that people have felt. Having thought a lot about Vermont State Colleges and the bridge funding and their place as drivers of the economy, the number one thing for me is that we've seen 3 or 4 independent colleges go down, and we've tried to shore up our oversight of their finances. We haven't done a lot to help their finances. And I don't think we're going to do that anytime soon. This is an opportunity to try to stabilize these, call them job creating institutions in these communities with federal funds. It's not going to make them whole, but it is going to substantially reduce their losses. So I can very easily make an argument to myself for the 10 million. Ruth, I think is, and I don't want to speak for you, Ruth, but you seemed like you were arguing for a reduced amount or maybe no amount.
Well, I'm just, it's hard for me to look at this just individual thing, because I'm wondering how much, if we provided more funding for arts organizations, for example. I'm looking at actually the quote that Susan included in her testimony about the other areas that our economist is suggesting we provide funding to, and nonprofits or organizations and arts organizations. Those were also some of my priorities, and I had been advocating for more funding for them. So I don't know if they got more money. So the 10 million just seems somewhat random to me. I guess I would agree with Senator Ash in that I'm wondering how that was arrived at. I also would like it to not be able to go to covering expenses, but rather just revenue losses, and specifically tuition revenue losses. Some of these colleges have other types of revenue, and I don't think we should be covering that. Sophia is the only one still on here, and she would be a perfect institution for where I would like to target it, a small revenue losses and that kind of thing. So I like the language that would direct it more and really defining what equitable is. The 10 million seems like a lot to me, frankly.
Can I ask, because the federal thrust has been to cover expenses and not revenue loss. So
I don't think so. With our business grants, where they covered revenue loss.
Well, like for instance, sales tax loss, we're not allowed to cover for the state.
Oh, for the state, but I was thinking about the business grants that we provided. Most of those cover revenue loss, not expenses.
No, understood. But what I mean is we've been making lots of decisions about expenses and reimbursing expenses. So this is the first time I've heard anybody really since the start of this talk about eliminating expenses as a category that we would reimburse.
That's what we do in the business grants.
But everywhere else we've been talking about expenses and what can we reimburse you for, K through 12.
Oh, I see what you mean. In K through 12. Yes, you're right. You're right.
Debbie.
It really depends on whether you look at it, look at them more as education or as business. And they were making the argument that they're businesses. But actually I had a question for Senator Hardy, because you mentioned, didn't you mention a figure of like $100,000? Is that per business? Is that like the average of what our businesses are receiving?
No, most of the businesses in our state, the maximum they can get is $50,000, regardless of the size of business. So most of them are getting far less than that with the grants through ACCD or through the tax department. The maximum grant that I know of is actually for forestry businesses, and that grant program allowed for $100,000 in grants. So, you know, ABIC has made both arguments as to with their businesses or their institutions of higher education. If you're looking at them just as businesses, then $10 million is way over funding them compared to what we are doing with other businesses in the state. So I was playing with numbers and thinking maybe we should do $250,000 might make sense. I don't know. But to Senator Bruce's point, if you're looking at them as institutions of education institutions, then that's more kind of reimbursing expenses. However, you know, these colleges had the option of not bringing students back in person and doing remote education and not having all of the expenses that they had. So that's where I'm caught up with the whole expenses thing. They had another option and they didn't take it for the most part. Some of them did, like SIT and Vermont Law School and others reduced dramatically the number of students, but not all of them did. And so that's what I don't want to say is we're going to reimburse all of your expenses for bringing back most of your students when they had another choice.
Well, what I was trying to get at with my question to Richard Kate is if they had made the decision not to bring back any students, take UVM for instance, there's a massive revenue loss involved with that because it's not tuition based, but you know, all of the things that you are not providing, you have to still run the dorms, you have to still, you know, maintain this whole infrastructure throughout remote teaching. Otherwise, you have to begin the process of winding down the physical plant, laying off the people that work there, et cetera. So the decision to go fully remote, it's not without its catastrophic financial consequences in certain instances, unless you're able to really, really go completely online, not lose a single dollar of tuition, and maybe dip into your endowment. Other folks that we haven't heard from yet.
I'd support the investment.
The House recommend?
Yep.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, it's hard for me. It seems like this is the job of the Appropriations Committee when you have all the different things. If I knew what the money, if it wasn't 10 million and it was 6 million, what the other 4 million was going to, then that would make it easier to decide. But just saying it should be less or should it be more, I don't feel like I have enough information to make that decision. Thinking of being, you know, provincial about it, thinking of the colleges, small colleges, you know, in my district, you know, it's a huge thing for them, and supporting them is going to support the businesses that kind of rely on them being around. So I'm supportive of it in that regard. And I get Senator Hardy's point. I think is well taken. I know it's kind of what you were just saying, Senator Baruth, is that their revenue loss would have been, for a lot of these schools, would have been greater had they not taken on the expenses of bringing them back. So that was something that they were trying to walk a fine line with. So I guess in the end, I'm basically supportive of it because I don't have more information. But I would like, but I don't know, I don't have a good suggestion. Equitably, even I like the new Slightly language, we can call it, is better than the House language, but we're still putting a lot of trust into the agency of administration. So
yeah, just to and then I'll go to Jim. To the, you know, if we were to recommend less, that would be our recommendation to APROPS. They could follow it or not follow it. They'd be in a negotiation with the House anyway. We don't know how strongly the House would support it. What we do know is that we won't get any say into where money would go if we recommended less than 10 million. So our only value is just to determine whether we think it's a good use of the money. Jim?
Well, in Rutland County, after losing two colleges, College of St. Joe's and Green Mountain College, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to help them with a little bit of, it's a lot of money to us, but it's not a lot of money to the institutions. I'm good with the 10 million because that could easily go elsewhere. If we want to drop it 5, the other 5 will disappear someplace else, and it will, good chances are it might not go to education.
Mhm.
So I'd like to keep it in the 10 million in just as it is. And I'm good with changing the language.
Okay.
I'd be good with that, but I'm afraid that if we want to toy around with the amount, we're going to lose it. And who knows where it's going to go after that. It's going to be just disappear someplace else. So I'd like to have a sure thing and knowing where the money's going to go and knowing that they're going to do a good job with the money.
Okay, Senator Ingram.
I think Senator Hardy makes really good points. I mean, just looking at Susan Steitley's memo, I mean, if we think of them more in terms of other educational, reimbursements for actual COVID-related, measures, there's a $5.3 million figure in her chart on page 3, which kind of makes a little more sense to me than the full 10. And I mean, yes, it'll be spent elsewhere, but there are a lot of needs. I would be more comfortable with a lower amount also.
Okay, I was not a math major, but I put it at 4.2 in support of the House recommend. Have I misrepresented anybody's vote there? So what I'm thinking we'll do is I don't want to go into great detail, but I'm thinking that what I will do is add to our letter a line or maybe 2 lines that say we took testimony from AVIC explaining AVIC's explanation for how the 10 million was reached, offering Susan Steitley's new language, and saying that a majority of the committee supported the 10 million. Does that sound fair?
Can I just ask a question, Phil?
Sure.
Which Susan Steitley language are we talking about? To be clear.
So this is what she's got on, that's page 2.
Yeah, at the bottom of page 2 of her
Bottom of page 2.
proposed legislative language.
And that it does, Ruth, it does speak to endowment size, which you had mentioned. Senator Ash had pointed to CARES Act funding guidelines as something he was comfortable with. So it seems like this is moving very much in the direction that appropriations wanted. Okay, so if that sounds all right, then what I will do is I'll put all of these small changes into one file, and I'll have Jeannie send it to appropriations as our committee recommendation. As far as Thursday goes, I was thinking about it this morning. I can't really think at the moment of any work we have to do Thursday. That's not to say we can't have hearings next week, but is there anything anybody feels urgently needs doing Thursday? Because we've done our budgetary consideration of the House actual language. We'll have drafted our funding memo. And as far as I know, school is in the process of beginning. So I think it makes sense to wait until next week if we want to do oversight, just general oversight testimony about the first week of school, which I think would make sense before we adjourn. So,
Can I just
yes,
ask,
Ruth?
Claire, I just wanted to make sure I understood from the beginning, did the appropriations committee, are they good with the stuff we sent them last week?
Yes.
They are, okay.
In fact, they added, as I said, Senator Ash added the after-school task force language that we passed back in February. Yeah, so, and if you remember, there was an amendment on the floor to remove the reference to tax and regulate from it.
Yes.
So that's the language that'll go forward with no mention of tax and regulate. But as I said, the Conference Committee on S54, the tax and regulate bill, the governor has insisted on, and the House has insisted on, a direct permanent funding source for after school that comes out of tax and regulate. Something could still blow up on that bill. You know, it's not at the finish line yet. It's close. And then it has to pass both bodies and get signed. But if so, that task force would be created in the budget, and then it would have 6 months from signing to produce the plan for spending the money. And the money won't start coming in for 1.5 years or 2 years. So the timing should work out pretty well still. Yeah, Andy.
Can I just ask for an update? What happened with the House language about the school deferred maintenance? I thought at one point did they put that in their budget? That just dropped off?
So they sent it from their committee to, I want to say, Ways and Means or Appropriations. I think it was Ways and Means. Never moved. There was, you remember, a memo came out about must-pass bills that the speaker and the pro tem agreed on, and we only had one bill on it.
About it.
What's that?
I never saw it. I just heard about it.
It was not very illuminating, and it turns out not to actually reflect what the House is prepared to do. So we had one bill on there, which was the healthcare bargaining language, which they agreed was must pass and then said they weren't going to pass it. So that's where that stands. But at the very bottom of that, there was a kind of a miscellaneous list that said something like to be decided or whatever. And that bill about school construction consultant was there. And then it said question mark in the budget. What I have said at this point to appropriations on the pro tem is that I think that should go through the regular process. That was like $1.5 million for a consultant. Frankly, that's the sort of thing that the House sometimes tries to drop in right at the end, like a $300,000, $500,000, $1.5 million appropriation, almost always for consultants to do work in the off season. And I let Representative Webb know earlier on, if she wanted that bill to move, she should send it to us in the normal course of things. So I would not personally say yes to that going in the budget, because it's too much outside the publicly illuminated process. So thanks for today, everybody. We're done a little early. Like I say, unless some major thing pops up, we won't meet Thursday. I'll leave the Zoom invitation in your boxes, but we all understand right now we're not going to use it. But if tomorrow Jane Kitchell handed me something and said, your committee has to look at this, I might send you an email and say, we're going to need to meet Thursday. But for right now, no. Okay, see you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.